Okay, let's just give this a go. This is a test video to see if I can edit anything at all. Probably not, we'll see. If I help a couple people along the way, that'll be good too. This will describe the types and difficulties of the endgame content that's available for PVE in Final Fantasy XIV. Later videos will hopefully have better content if I keep trying this, but yeah, let's just give it okay, here we go! Okay, if you made it through that awful intro, congratulations. Let's talk about dungeons. Dungeons are the easiest form of endgame content. They're required for the story, so players of all skill levels have to be able to complete them. They're the classic form of MMO instance content, where a small group traverses a dangerous area, fighting a pack of enemies and a series of bosses. The party's progression through a dungeon will be very linear, there's no deviation or alternate paths you can take, and it's limited by a series of forced pauses, called walls, where players cannot progress until all of the enemies that appear before that wall are defeated. The bosses in dungeons have a very small set of mechanics and repeat them forever, so there's no enrage or damage check. And although dungeons are the easiest part of the endgame, they are the part of the endgame that you'll repeat the most. A daily activity called Expert Roulette is one of the most efficient ways to collect a type of weekly capped currency that is critical for obtaining the best in slot gear for all your jobs, but we'll talk about gearing in another video. A dungeon is released every patch, and Expert Roulette will randomly give you one of the two most recently released dungeons. Given that they're part of a system called Expert Roulette, there are a couple assumptions around completing dungeons with a random party. These aren't required, but choosing not to engage with your job and the game while partying with other players can be seen as disrespectful to their time. Typically, the enemies that appear between bosses, called mobs or trash, should be pulled wall to wall with AoE damaging abilities. That means you two healers. Then, everyone should at least have a very simple idea of how their job is played to do damage to the bosses. If you read your abilities, folks, they'll tell you what they do. This process is repeated for 3 to 5 bosses, then the dungeon ends. That's it, easy peasy. There's a community for speedrunning dungeons in Final Fantasy, but I don't know jack about that, so... Alliance raids have some of the biggest groups in 14, with 24 players participating in each raid. Alliance raids are like large, glorified dungeons. There's a lot more bosses, but you still run from boss to boss while sometimes clearing trash packs. There are 3 Alliance raids per expansion, telling their own story that is, at best, tangential to the main story. 2B really doesn't have much to do with the battle between the light and the dark. The bosses in Alliance raids are more involved than bosses in dungeons, but the content's still pretty easy. Alliance raids are a little more interesting than this section gives them credit for, but its role in the endgame is honestly pretty limited. Except for some sweet glams, baby! Trials are where we depart from the dungeon formula and move on to the rest of the endgame's content. In Trials, you and 7 other players queue into a one-boss fight, spawn into the boss's arena, kill the boss, then leave. That's it. No exploration, no trash, nothing else. The trial is released every patch, and they cover some aspect of the main story or a closely related side story. Trials have 2 difficulties, normal and extreme. The normal difficulty of trials, like dungeons, are required for story progression. This means that they have the same difficulty curve and any player should be able to beat them. Extreme difficulty is the first bit of endgame where some amount of coordination is required. It doesn't mean that it's hard, but you'll queue into extreme trials in the party finder rather than the duty finder, so there's some amount of player skill and execution accountability. Beyond the gear that they offer, trials also have a low chance to drop a shiny mount. It keeps a theme throughout the expansion. There is bad luck protection for mount farmers that requires 50 to 100 kills, depending on the boss. Again, these play a small part in the series endgame, but they're a good transition to the endgame for newer players. Speaking of transitions... Bam! Raids. The core of the endgame. It's a strictly optional type of content that tells a short side story. Raids, like trials, are a single boss and a single arena that you and 7 others have to kill. Raids do, however, come in a tier. There are 3 tiers of raids in each expansion, with each tier having 4 fights. This means that you get 12 fights ranging from 8 to 15 minutes each over the course of an expansion. There are 2 difficulties of raids, normal raids and savage. Normal raids are fairly easy, but savage difficulty is where some amount of game skill is required. The boss mechanics get more complicated, there's a strict enrage timer so you need to know some amount of your damage rotation, and team coordination becomes key. Therefore, many players choose to take on savage raids as part of a long-term, consistent group called a static. You'll find groups taking on savage fights in the party finder, but side effects may vary. Savage raids scale in difficulty each tier, with the first fight being relatively easy and doable by many players, while the 4th fight can be a serious ass-whooping. Raids come out every other patch and provide the majority of your earned best in slot gear until the next raid tier is released. so completing the raids for their weekly loot lockout becomes really important. Like mounts and trials, there is bad luck protection to make sure that your first clear of all 4 fights each week has meaning and helps you gear. Once people are comfortable with the raid tier and have geared their jobs, the next part of the endgame begins. Players who like raiding seek to push themselves to the limit in 2 ways: comparing their damage outputs to other players also seeking to become the best at their job, and seeing which team of players can kill a boss the fastest. These activities are called parsing and speed killing, but we'll talk about them in another video about high-end play. From here, there is ultimately, oh my god that was bad, one type of content left. Ultimate content is the true measure of a player's skill. There is only one difficulty: Ultimate. Ultimate fights work like trial or raid fights, but more grand. Like, look at this bleeping robot, dude! They take the entire story of some older PvE content, including multiple bosses, multiple phases, and transitions, and use those to bombard you with mechanics for up to 19 minutes straight. Ultimate fights that are current require some serious team coordination, and they're almost exclusively going to be killed by statics rather than pugs. Hours of grinding the fight, learning its ins and outs, team communication, and problem solving are required to complete an ultimate. But completing an ultimate gives you a shiny weapon, and you know I like me some shiny weapons. This type of content is the newest part of the 14 endgame, so its normal release cadence isn't really set in stone yet. Looks like there's going to be 2 ultimate fights released each expansion, and the odd patches between raid tiers. And that's about it. The Final Fantasy XIV PVE endgame. I don't know, I just kind of like it. God, outros are hard to do. Like, I don't want to be that guy, like, comment, and subscribe, but like, what the hell else am I supposed to say? I guess I'll start working on a couple other video ideas that I have, but if there's some question or topic you want me to cover, just let me know, I guess. Okay, here's what I'll do. I'll try a different sign-off every video till one sticks. For this video, I'll see you at another time.